Hello and welcome to the third edition of the Leadership Chat, which is a monthly series of the Indira Foundation Leadership Development Initiative at IIT Gandhinagar. My name is Achal Mehra. I am a faculty member in the Humanities program at IIT Gandhinagar, and I am co-hosting this program today with Mukul Pandya, who is a former editor-in-chief of Knowledge at Wharton and currently a senior fellow at the Wharton Consumer Analytics program. Who's joining us from Lawrence, New Jersey. Mukul will be introducing our speaker and getting us started on the program. Thanks, Mukul.
Thank you, Achal, and welcome to all of you. So happy to be with all of you in Gandhinagar, sitting here on a very cold day in New Jersey. And I just wanted to say we are all very honored to have Elena Botelho with us for this Leadership Chat series. As you know already from her bio, she has been a partner with ghSMART, which is a consulting firm, since 2007. And she's a highly sought after advisor for leading CEOs, boards, and investors all around the world. But what I find most interesting about Elena is that she initiated and co-leads the CEO Genome Project, which was featured in a Harvard Business Review cover story, and which she later developed along with her co-author, Kim Powell, into an excellent book called The CEO Next Door, which is based on a breakthrough study of more than 2,600 leaders. It's basically extensive research that supports CEOs and executives on the path to CEO and boards managing all aspects of CEO succession. And what the research has done is to explore behaviors and paths that lead to the top. What are some of the typical setbacks that CEOs encounter, and also ways to prevent that from happening? So why should all this matter to you? Well, if you think about how many CEOs of major companies today were IIT students before they began their working lives, I believe that Elena's research and the insights that you will get from listening to her today will be extremely relevant to all of you as you think about your own future. Before joining ghSMART, Elena worked for McKinsey, where she advised CEOs and other senior executives. And she did a lot of other very impressive things, but you can read all those in her bio. Before I before I turn it over to her, I would like to tell you something that is not in her bio. In my career as a journalist, I have interviewed many leaders and experts on leadership. And among them, there are only a handful who stand out because they have three qualities, or as I like to think of them, they have three metallic qualities. They have minds of steel, backbones of iron, and hearts of gold. And Elena is one of them. She is one of the smartest, strongest, and kindest people whom I know. And I'll now request Elena to speak to you directly so that you can discover these qualities for yourselves. Elena, over to you.
Mukul, thank you. Ashal, thank you very much for having me. I'm really honored to be here. And Mukul, I'm absolutely terrified to say anything after this intro because it could only go downhill from here. You know, it's funny. I always joke in my advisory work. A lot of clients I support already think they're the best in the world at whatever it might be, and especially at leadership, they must be the best in the world. And so we often come into these organizations and management teams where everybody tells us how much they hate consultants and how consultants are absolutely useless. And I love working with those clients because the expectations are so low. I could not possibly disappoint. Now, your Peace Prize nomination, I'm really nervous. I'm not sure I can stand up to such a high honor, but I do know that every time you and I have collaborated, we hope to bring something useful and inspiring to everyone who is watching. And we hope that, at least I hope that anybody participating in this program, which Ashal, thank you for sharing your vision for it. It's terrific. And I love kind of your thought about access and making sure that this is accessible to so many. And so I hope that everybody takes away something that will help them in some way, no matter who they become to be, no matter what your aspirations are. Some of the kind of kindest praise outside of Mukul's that I heard for the book was I was walking down the hallway in one of my clients, and this 30-year-old woman came up to me and said, "Thank you so much." And I didn't even know her. And she said, "Look, you wrote the book and I read it. And it just reminded me there's nothing I couldn't do." And this woman has no desire to be a CEO. And so part of the reason the book is called The CEO Next Door is that we hope that the ideas in the book will really help you no matter what, what path you might take. So, and no matter what doors you hope to open. So Ashal, Mukul, how would you like to do it? Did you want me to give kind of a short
I think if you
voiceover
would
and then we'll jump to questions, or what would be
start
most
with a
helpful?
small overview, and then you and I can talk a little bit, and then we'll turn it over to the students' questions.
Okay, super. That's great. Well, maybe I'll share a bit about how the book came about. And there were probably two main drivers of the book. There was one main driver and the other one was a catalyst. So for years, and Mukul mentioned, so ghSMART has been around since 1995. And the world's top companies and investment firms hire ghSMART to help them decide who should get the CEO job. We don't do any search work, so we don't find anyone, which allows us to be 100% objective when we look at executives and help companies decide what is it that they can and cannot deliver. And so when we provide advice, all the data that you see in the book or in the Harvard Business Review article, all the data underlying the research wasn't created for the purposes of the book. It was real data that real clients, real companies relied on to decide who should get a job, how to support them in the role, who should get promoted. And so the data you're taking advantage of is actually, for the first time in the world, is available to kind of insights from that data are available for the first time in the world to the general public. Because up until now, it's all been kind of really private to our clients. And so as we've been supporting executives for many, many years, since 95, as I said, what we noticed, and it was over 20,000 executives in the database, companies large and small, more US heavy, but about 25% of the sample is international as well. What we kept noticing is that even the best boards, even the best leaders who think they've seen it all, who deliver great results, when it comes to choosing who should get a job, they have about a 50-50 chance of getting it wrong. So think about, and I'm assuming, so this is a stereotype, but I'm going to assume this is a very analytical group. So try to think of what other business process do we tolerate a 50% error rate? It's astounding. And it's painful. So just with CEO role alone, there's an estimate that over $112 billion of shareholder value gets lost every year because the wrong people get chosen to lead companies. And those people get chosen by boards that are really experienced. And so what happens? And I come from a family of mathematicians. So when I keep seeing the same error over and over and over again, I get very curious and we go to the data. And so for years, this has been kind of percolating for me. And then I had a son in 2009. And then I had a second son in 2012. And I realized, and I don't know how many of you have kids. So what happened to me, at least when I had children, is two things came to kind of a paradox at the same time. I've never felt more passionate about making a difference, because now it's my kids that are going to inherit the world that the current leaders have a hand in creating. And at the same time, I've never felt quite as sleep deprived and completely unable to take care even of my daily responsibilities, let alone kind of take care of as many clients or make a difference on the scale that I would hope. And so that's when the book came about, because rather than helping one client at a time, we thought it was really important to get these insights to be available to really broadly and far beyond our clients. And so the most exciting thing for me about the book and the research is that it has been, and thanks to Mukul and some of, you've really supported the book from the very beginning. They've been millions and millions of people who now have been able to benefit from some of these insights here. And I guess the two thoughts, if I had to boil it down, the two thoughts I hope you take away one is back to that woman that stopped me in the hallway. There is nothing you couldn't do. And second, unfortunately, when we choose people, things that look good, things that make someone seem like a great leader, and then when we really look under the covers and we really look at the data, things that deliver results aren't always the same. And that's where you get a lot of challenges. So.
Thank you, Elena. That was a very fascinating overview, and I'm sure there'll be some interesting conversation about this coming up. If I could just take a step back before we talk about the book and the research, how did you get interested in leadership in the first place?
You know, the honest answer is, so I was 14 years old. I had a family member who was hospitalized with mental illness. And so that on the one hand, and then on the other hand, I was in this funny position where my friends' parents were coming to me for advice about how to deal with their teenage children. And so at 14, I thought I really wanted to be a psychologist. I grew up in the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, being a psychologist wasn't a profession, it was a method of prosecution. And so my family pretty quickly said, no, you're gonna do something useful. So if you're interested in helping people be successful, why don't you go become a teacher? And then when I came to the US, you know, whether it's, you know, looking at what happened with Russia, whether it's looking at some of the work that we did at McKinsey with leaders, you can have the best Excel spreadsheet, you can have the best strategy, unless you have the right leaders, whether you're running a country, as we all have found out in the US, or a company, or a household, right? Or, you know, being a participant in a church group. Leadership really is what makes a difference between success and failure. And so it felt like there was a really high multiplier on helping people get leadership right. And at the same time, there's probably no other area of business, again, where there's so much misconception and so little data. And so it felt like an area that makes a huge difference. And yet there's so many myths that really don't hold up to real analysis and real research. So it felt like an important place to contribute.
So that's a perfect segue to what I was about to ask next, which is, where, as you looked at the data, I was really fascinated by what you said, that there are myths about leadership which actually don't hold up to scrutiny when you look under the hood. Can you tell us some of the most prevailing myths that are the most enduring myths? Why do they endure so much? And what did you actually find when you looked at the data?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will have to kind of caveat from the outset is that, again, the data set is fairly US heavy. And so I'm really curious, one day when I do come to campus, it would be great to have a live dialogue, because I imagine there may be other myths that hold in the Indian culture that may be different from the American, the American stereotypes and patterns. So I will share some things, and I'd be very open to your feedback around what holds and is also true and what doesn't. But I probably will start with your question, why, Mukul? Because I think it's a really important question. So I was helping a Fortune 100 company prepare for CEO succession over 5 years. So it was a long period of time and a long process. And at some point we talked about, as they were very thoughtful, very deliberate, very organized, and we were getting to a decision point. And we had a really honest conversation with the board and saying, you know, as you go to make this decision, you know, let's remind ourselves of two numbers, 50-50, so 50% chance of getting it wrong, and 200 million. And they looked at me, so what are you talking about? So 200 million is roughly kind of the evolution of a mammal's brain, right? And so what happens is, no matter whether you're a CEO of a, you know, world's largest industrial company, or if you're going on a date, when it comes to picking people, so the why for stereotypes is really, really important, and you will get caught. I guarantee you there'll be times in your life where you will get caught, is that when it comes to these qualitative decisions, so there's a lot of research saying we make the most important decisions emotionally, even when we think we're following data. And our emotional brain was formed literally for 200 years to do only a couple of things well. Number one, find food. Number two, find a mate. And number three, avoid becoming food for someone else.
Right.
And not necessarily in that order. And so what happens is, no matter whether you had a 35-year career history of, leading a marketing organization, when it comes to picking human beings, you're using those 200 million. The 200 million is just bigger than 30 or 50, no matter how. And so the why is that we get seduced by factors that have nothing to do with somebody's performance. And the worst thing is, unless we're conscious of our biases, we fall right into it. And particularly under stress, right? Because a lot of times when you choose somebody, it's a really high risk decision. So under stress, so where does our mammal brain lead us to get excited, right? Confident people are more likely to be picked, to a factor of 2. So if you project confidence, you're more likely to get selected for a job. If you are extroverted, you're more likely to get a job. If you've got great pedigree, if you're coming from an Ivy League institution, you're more likely to get a job. Why is all of that? Because all of that subconsciously or consciously signals safety. It's basically somebody looking at a candidate who is charismatic, extroverted, kind of looks the part, makes people feel safe that they're going to get what they're looking for. It was fascinating. So one of our clients invested in a company, and they asked us to help them look at the management team. And as part of that, we interviewed the prior investors. And the investor went on and on about the CEO, and he said, look, and he literally started, his words were, look, this is like, he walks and looks exactly as a CEO. That's exactly what you would imagine. He's so articulate. He's so thoughtful. He makes people feel so good about being in the room with him. And so for about, it was a 30-minute call. For about 25 minutes, he went on how this guy is really just a portrait of a CEO. And then at the end, he said, well, yeah, I mean, it really took us about 4 out of 5 years of our investment to realize he wasn't really the right guy for the job. So I wouldn't invest with him again, but he looks great, right? And so that's the dilemma, and that's the challenge. When we bring the data to it, so let's pick, for example, one around Ivy League, right? Because that's more factual. And it doesn't apply to IIT, right? I'm sure. But what we found in the US is that in our data set, about 8% of CEOs graduated from top Ivy League undergraduate institutions. So your Harvards and Whartons and Princetons, right? About another 8%, almost the same amount, percentage of the database didn't go to college at all, or didn't graduate from college at all. And in both sides, both tails of that distribution, you will find some outperformers and you'll find some strugglers, right? And so again, the pedigree wasn't sufficient. Extroversion is one that it's really interesting. When I talk to groups like yours, usually people laugh and they can't believe that boards to this day are swayed by extroversion. And I will tell you, to this day, the most sophisticated boards will talk about someone being extroverted or introverted as something that's relevant to their job performance. And so extroverts are more likely to get a job. When we looked at actual performance data, we bucketed our CEOs into 3 groups: exceeds expectations, meets expectations, and didn't deliver, underperform. So if you look at the top 2 groups together, so whether it meets or exceeds together, there was really no statistically significant difference between extroverts and introverts. Interestingly, when you looked at the exceeds, actually introverts were slightly ahead. Again, for me, and people like to kind of really get excited about that factor. If you're an introvert like me, for example, you probably would. I think the main point here is it's not about introversion, extroversion. It's about having the right skills and the right behaviors that make you a strong leader. So it's what makes one effective in the role is far beyond what kind of makes somebody seductive for somebody looking to make a hiring decision.
So thanks. That sounds really fascinating, Elena, and really helps to explain why the error rate is as high as 50%, because people get seduced by these superficial qualities. But as you did your research and you tried to identify not the superficial behaviors or attributes, but the behaviors that really matter, you came up with 4 key behaviors. I'm very curious about, of all the different behaviors you could have chosen, why did these 4 seem the most important? And if you could briefly summarize for the students what those 4 are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so we let the data speak for itself. We actually, so this is where I abandoned my McKinsey training. So at McKinsey, we always take a hypothesis-driven approach to problem solving, which is, ahead of time, you try to think about what the answer might be. We felt in this case, the value and the power of the research would be in letting the data speak for itself, because the danger of leadership research is that we do all approach it with our preconceived notions, with our values, and with our hopes and expectations of what we'll see. And so actually some of the things we found surprised us and even annoyed us. I'll come back to that as a result. But what we did is we launched exploratory research with world's leading data miners. We worked with SAS Institute, we worked with the University of Chicago, we worked with a lot of other data miners using the latest available tools to do raw text analytics. And so that's why this research wouldn't have been possible maybe 5 or 10 years ago, because we were able to, for the first time, cut directly into the interview notes, unstructured interview notes of these leaders, and really look for patterns. That was one thread of research. And then the other piece is we were interviewing CEOs to ask them what they've seen make a difference, right? Those who were very experienced. And so really these four behaviors popped out of the data, popped out of the analysis. There were certain things that people will ask us, well, why isn't ethics on it, right? That's an obvious big. Why isn't strategic thinking on it? Why isn't vision on it, right? Or the one that we struggled with the most is when reliability, it's interesting, you started on reliability, Mukul. When reliability came out, my co-author Kim and I, so we're both working moms, right? And reliability just sounds exhausting to us, because in our daily lives, we have to be reliable for our children, for our families, for our clients. And so when reliability came out of the data, we just were annoyed. Like you wouldn't even imagine. We had hours of debates about could we possibly not include it, because it just sounded so pedestrian. Like, what's reliability? You don't think of reliability as a CEO quality. It just, reliability is something you want from your, I don't know, from your driver or from your dentist, right? But not a CEO. But yet, actually, reliability arguably turned out to be one of the most powerful qualities. In our data set, leaders who were high on reliability were as much as 15 times more likely to be successful, to deliver strong results. And so that was a real, and that's also another piece of research we did that was interesting, is we opened online a very basic self-assessment tool. And so I haven't checked recently, but about a year ago, we had about 17,000 individuals all over the world of different roles take that self-assessment just to see kind of how they rate on different behaviors. And reliability sounds like the easiest behavior, because it's something you can practice. You could be 5 years old and practice 5 years old and practice reliability. And yet when we looked at the behavior at this population of 17,000 people who took the self-assessment, it was the lowest rated behavior. So it's actually really hard to be reliable. And a lot of people actually, realize in close inspection that they're not nearly as reliable as they think they are. But to give you the quick snapshot of the behaviors, the easy way to think of them is think of the word dare, D-A-R-E, dare. So think of it as dare to think differently about leadership. So D stands for decisiveness. A stands for adaptability, something that we've all gotten a crash course on in the last year. R stands for reliability, and E stands for engage for results. Engage is how you engage with others. And so those were the 4 behaviors that stood out to be statistically significant coming out of the data.
I'm sure we could spend hours talking about each of those 4 behaviors. But I'll ask one final question, and then I know that there is a long list of questions that students have submitted. So I don't want to get in the way of the students' questions. So let me ask one last question and then turn it over to Acha. And this is, if you were an IIT student and you wanted one behavior that captured all the 4 dare behaviors that you mentioned, what can you do today to become a better leader in the future?
So what we found in these behaviors, it's really interesting. It actually doesn't matter where you start. When you start to work on any of these 4 behaviors and you're able to demonstrate significant progress, what happens is that it actually improves your ability to develop on the other aspects as well. And so I would answer your question this way. If you want to be a better leader, I would actually pick one place to start with. And as you pick it, just be decisive, right? Look at these 4 behaviors and don't even overthink it. Just think, well, maybe this year we're still in the window of New Year's resolutions. Actually, January is a really important month. This is where, by now you've either abandoned them or you're actually going strong, right? So pick one of these behaviors and try to make some significant improvement. What you'll see is that by developing that, you'll be able to train your muscles that will then help you, maybe you can go then to the next one and then you can go to the next one. I think I would probably say if I didn't know someone, reliability is a great place to start, simply just because, again, the data shows that it's the most powerful behavior. Decisiveness would be the other place that I would go to because it really applies in every domain of our life. And actually decisiveness probably for IIT students is relevant because what I find is some of my smartest clients struggle with decisiveness. So a lot of the times when you're so intellectual, when you're so analytical, you could see so much more than maybe somebody else can, so many factors. Sometimes you get stuck. And at McKinsey, we used to call it boiling the ocean or analysis paralysis. And so knowing that IIT students are brilliant, I would say probably between reliability and decisiveness would be good places to start.
Great. Thank you so much, Elena. That was fantastic. And now, Achal, over to you for the students' questions.
Okay, thanks, Mukul. Elena, let me just pick up on that last point that you were making, because I would be one of those who has difficulty with decisiveness. And, as you said, many people who are, let's say, in the engineering fields, which are dealing with analytical subjects, oftentimes find that a difficult trait. But in your article, I think you made a very persuasive point, which if you can expound a little on, which was probably the only thing that I think triggered something for me as someone who struggles with making decisions. And that point was good CEOs realize that a wrong decision may be better than no decision at all. And I thought that was a very powerful statement. Can you expound on that a bit?
It's interesting, Ashal. So decisiveness and our findings on decisiveness often surprise many in the audience. When I have this conversation with CEOs, they just nod their head because to them, they've lived it. When I have this dialogue with non-CEOs, it's really shocking to them. So when we started to do our research, we weren't surprised that decision-making popped up as an important factor, but what we expected to see is that the best CEOs make smarter decisions. They make better decisions. And time and again, what we found is they are more decisive. And often you see that actually even from early years in their career is where they're willing to make a call even when there's ambiguity. And they're not afraid to then, if they need to, take the data in and course correct. Bezos talks a lot in his annual letters about Amazon, and what he aspires Amazon to be is he talks about moving fast, right? And saying that it's about the velocity of decision making and precision, right? And making good decisions. And that a lot of companies really emphasize the good decisions, but by the time they're ready to make a decision, Amazon or somebody else has already outpaced them. And so this willingness to try and fail, to make the decision and then course correct has been really, really important. And especially if you think about a leader, because a leader is a pace setter for the entire organization. So again, no matter whether you're a leader in your family and you're trying to decide where to go on vacation, or will you send your kids to school or have them study online, or if you're a leader running a huge organization, if you can't make a decision, you paralyze the rest of the organization. And so speed of decision making has been a big, big factor.
Okay, then let me turn to some of the student questions here. And here's one, I guess, that I can relate at least when I was sitting on that same bench that this student was. This is an IIT Gandhinagar student who's asking, I do not have confidence in myself due to the average or below average academic performance. I have ideas, but do not feel confident enough to bring them to the table. Do CEOs who have not been doing so well academically exist? If so, how were they sure of their self-confidence?
Wow, that's such a great question. And what an honest question. Thank you. So there actually, I would kind of parse these things out. So there's the confidence piece, And then there's the academics piece. And the answer is yes and yes. So and I'm curious, I won't ask you, but I'm curious about the gender of the individual asking the question.
It's a male.
It's a male. Oh, good. Well, it's good to hear that the male is having confidence issues and even willing to admit it. That's good. So absolutely. So on the confidence piece, I will tell you, even the current CEOs, right? I often work with them in the times when they're least confident. Number one, everyone who gets into the job, if they have any sense of humility or reality, they will be nervous and they will be worried that this is a huge burden on their shoulders and whether or not they're ready for the role. And in the job, every day they're faced with obstacles and challenges that are something that they may have not been prepared for, especially again in the last year or so. Now, projecting confidence versus being confident aren't always the same thing. And projecting confidence is important, both important for getting the job to begin with, and also for instilling confidence in others. And so many times the CEOs who may feel uncertain or may feel nervous find ways to kind of manage that, share that, and manage themselves through it, while at the same time projecting a sense of calm and confidence for the others. And so the thing I would tell the person that wrote it, I can guarantee you, because I've seen it, if you think about leaders who look like they've got it all covered, I guarantee you that they have moments that are just as painful and gut-wrenching as you do. And we've analyzed, and so just know that I had a conversation with one of my clients, encouraging her to think about confidence as almost like a health issue. So imagine that, because your feeling of confidence is kind of more about your emotions and your hormones going through your body than anything else, right? And so what we talked about is, imagine you had a fever and you still had to go to work. Would you feel you can perform at the same level? Probably not, but would you let it really jeopardize your aspirations, really change the course of your decisions? Also not. And so when you're feeling this lack of confidence, number one, know that no matter how bad of a mistake you're going to make, there is this big leader out there who's done things that are 10 times worse. And I can tell you that because we've seen 20,000 of them, and every one of the 20,000 have made dramatic mistakes, stupid mistakes, sometimes mistakes that have cost people lives. And so it's going to be pretty hard for you, no matter how bad of a misstep you take, to exceed some of the things that, quote unquote, some of the most successful people have done. But how you manage yourself through that confidence and what you allow yourself to do or not do and how you allow it to take you off track, that's on you, and that you can develop. And Mukul is a master of thinking about how do you manage yourself through some difficult situations, right? On the academics, I mean, look, life's gonna be a lot easier if you've got good grades. There's no doubt, right? And yes, there are absolutely CEOs that failed out of college, and often it's folks that it's leaders that are find themselves in entrepreneurial pursuits or in the middle market companies and then become wildly successful. But you have, one of Fortune 500s, it's one of the largest companies in America, is a company called Republic Waste. And it's run by a CEO who started out as a garbage man. Like, he didn't go to college. His first job was a garbage man. He's one of the best CEOs in his industry. We actually have an article we wrote specifically researching CEOs who didn't graduate from college and how they got to the top. And what we found with them is they often stay in the same industry. And so they become real deep industry experts, and they're outstanding at building teams. And so they're not afraid to hire up, right? In America, we have this expression, marry up, right? So they're not afraid to hire up. So while they may not have the best pedigree or the best academics, they hire teams that really complement them. So those are some ideas. But I really appreciate the question. I would tell you, actually, the fact that you're not afraid to ask the question tells me that you've got great intrinsics to be a good leader, because that it starts with being willing to be uncomfortable and just face your mistakes and face your shortcomings. So well done.
The next question, I've been working with many top-level CEOs during my decade of work experience. Most are bossy, aggressive type, but very few of them were genuine leaders. Few are really cool bosses, but not leaders. I always want to lead an entire organization, So I want to know, and I have experienced some aggressive leaders. So I want to know, are aggressive leaders more successful than others?
What a great question. Well, so we could have a whole hour just debating what it means to be a successful leader, or what it means to be a leader as opposed to manager or boss, right? So in our research, because we took kind of this very wonky research-based approach, we said, all right, there are lots of debates about what it means to be a successful leader. We're going to define it very simply. Who delivers results? Not who is really enjoyable to work for, sorry. Not who looks to be most inspirational, but just simply when you look at the company performance, at the end of the day, the leader's job is to make their organization successful. And so we looked at delivering results. So engaging for results is one of the behaviors that popped out of the data. And what we found is that the leaders who engage to deliver results for the organization, as opposed to be liked, are 2 times more likely to be successful. You could imagine kind of a distribution curve, and you could see kind of really aggressive, obnoxious leaders on one side, and kind of really nice guys who are trying to please, and women who are trying to please everyone on the other. And the reality is ultimately you don't become very successful on either side of it. And those leaders who become most effective are the ones who can engage followers, who can get others to follow them, but follow them for the sake of delivering, not for the sake of being liked. And so that's really important. But I think it's accurate to say that most CEOs I work with would be seen as pretty hard driving as well. So.
Okay, this question from Soham Bandhopadhyay. Steve Jobs had only one ebook in his iPad, Autobiography of a Yogi. He reportedly read this book once every year. Given that the yoga philosophy leads away from worldly pursuits, such as money and success, and Steve Jobs was one of the most iconic leaders of modern time, how do you explain this contradiction?
Oh, what a great question. Mukul, it reminds me of our conversation we had when I was in Long Island. Remember last summer?
Yes.
What Mukul and I we talked about everything under the sun, but one of the things we were pondering on is if more business leaders practiced mindfulness, would they be as aggressive, right? Like I always think about, would we have Nike, right? Would we have like 15,000 types of Nike shoes, or would we only need 1 or 2, right? So I don't know the answer to that, is the truth. But look, I think whether it's yoga or meditation or prayer for some and religion for others, or their family, life is a difficult journey, no matter how far you go, whether you become a CEO or a leader or in any regard. And ultimately, for a leader, or I think for anyone, finding that touchstone, finding that place that helps you stay steady, helps you understand who you are and what's really important is essential. And so for Steve, it sounds like it was that book was really important to him. For someone else, it might be a meditation or mindfulness practice. So I think, again, what I would encourage you to do is continue to self-discover. And it's interesting. I had a conversation with a CEO recently, and we talked a lot about the current environment and how leaders were challenged, right? Because nobody was prepared to deal with COVID. Nobody was prepared to deal with social justice issues that really exploded in this country. And what I found is it's the leaders that are not afraid to really look inward as well and ask themselves questions of what makes me uncomfortable? How do I stare that in the face? Those are the leaders that thrive in the situation of unknown, because there's no playbook, right? It's not, nobody has prepared any one of us for what's come our way in the last year. And so I haven't read that book specifically, but I know that not every leader has that. There are plenty of leaders and plenty of CEOs that are just looking at their stock charts and short term they deliver. But I think the more the world throws surprises our way, really understanding yourself is the first step to understanding and being able to deal with any challenges that come your way. But I'm very biased, right? Because that's an area where I spend a lot of time with the leaders. So.
Yeah, so yeah, I guess your entire focus is in performance, right? That's what you were measuring them on. So, this question from Tejas Vinod: what important soft skills does a leader need? And is it true that some are born leaders because they have those skills?
So I don't believe in born leaders personally. I mean, look, it's there's a famous ballet dancer who is American and came out of Russia, Mikhail Baryshnikov. And so you'd think for an artistic pursuit, certainly you would have like certain physique aspects. So he has really short legs, but in the meantime, he's one of the best ballet dancers in the world, right? So he had other factors. So obviously we're all born with a certain set of skills, and some skills and traits make it easier for us or harder for us. Some of us, we all start ahead in some areas and behind in others. What's cool about these 4 behaviors that we found, and I guess you could call all 4 of them soft skills, really, right? Decisiveness, adaptability, reliability, and engaging with others, is that no matter whether I look at the CEOs I coach who are wildly successful, or I'm looking at my kids, all of us come to this world with some strengths in some of these behaviors, and that we can absolutely improve in others. And it's kind of never too early, never too late. In that sense, I would make an analog with yoga, actually, right? Or at least the Western understanding of yoga is you can practice your entire life, but you never reach kind of perfection, right? And so in that regard, I would point you to those four behaviors as universally applicable behaviors that will help you advance no matter where you start in your career. And by looking at them, you'll probably find where, I'm naturally more adaptable, but it's really hard for me to be reliable and predictable. Well, so maybe that's a place for you to try to make some progress.
So actually in that 4th theme that you had, which is a leader is willing to engage with stakeholders, but there's a second part to that, which is willingness to face conflict. Can you speak to that aspect? Because typically one thinks of somebody being engaging with stakeholders as being very friendly and outgoing. How does conflict fit into that picture?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really critical. So one of our clients, Tom Monahan, used to run a company here called Corporate Executive Board. And Tom had a great way of putting it. He said, as a CEO, I have customers, employees, and the board, right? And then the market and the community at large as my stakeholders. And my job as a CEO is to keep them all sufficiently dissatisfied where I can do the right thing for the company, but not so dissatisfied that I get fired. And so what was fascinating to me, actually, what I loved, and Tom is a brilliant man and kind of very provocative. What I loved about it is he didn't say, I need to keep them all satisfied. He said, no, my first job, it's a little bit like being an orchestra conductor, right? And in an orchestra, you've got these, first violins that are really temperamental and real prima donnas. And then you've got, bassoon player, and you've got the drums and all of that. And so your job as a CEO is not to please each stakeholder. It's to think about ultimately the success of the entire organization is on your shoulders. And if you do the right things for the company to be successful, then shareholders ultimately will be better off, the customers, the employees. But if you try to appease and please and placate, you will fail trying, right? Because your number one job, again, is for the organization to be successful. And so you don't get that done without conflict. And actually, we looked at some of the career trajectories of people who got to the top. And oftentimes they're not afraid to shake the trees. They're not afraid to rock the boat. They do take on constructive conflict. What's really important is there's a difference between conflict for your own benefit, right? Where your agenda is to advance yourself versus when your agenda is to do the right thing for the business. And while any one conflict may not end up in your favor, people smell that a mile away. And so if you truly are somebody who is driven towards success of others, towards helping advance whatever community or organization you're part of, people will trust your intent ultimately and will forgive you some of the sharp elbows. But if ultimately your ambition is really just to get ahead, people will smell that too. And that will be really obvious. And then that conflict tends to not work out very well at the end. Well, cool, you had a question?
Yeah, Achal and Elena, if you permit me, can I share a story from my past that illustrates exactly the point that Elena was making? So back in 2005, 2006, Knowledge at Wharton wrote a book about leadership called Lasting Leadership. And it was an attempt that we made to identify which leaders had been successful over long periods of time, say 25 years or more, and what were some of the attributes that defined these leaders. And we identified 25 leaders who had done this in different ways, who had run organizations over long periods of time, and tried to find out who would be the number one among them. And the person who came out on top, and I think this would be very appealing to an engineering audience. But the person who came out on top was Andy Grove, who was the co-founder of Intel. So I was lucky to spend half a day with Andy Grove interviewing him for this book. And one of the questions that I asked him was, when he decided to step down from the role of CEO, there were several people who were in contention to be his successor. And he picked one of them. This was his decision. He picked one of them, Craig Barrett, to succeed him as the leader. And I asked him, what was it about Craig that made you select him relative to other equally bright, people who could have gotten the CEO job after Andy Grove stepped down? And his answer was so wise and insightful that I have never forgotten it. He said that, in order to be a leader, you have to have ambition. Ambition is an important quality. But what Craig Barrett had was the right kind of ambition. And I said, tell me what you mean by the right kind of ambition. And he said, Craig was not ambitious for himself personally. He was ambitious for the entire team that was running the company. And he said that he expressed it in this way. He said, ambition, there is a trade-off between ambition and productivity. If you are not ambitious, you're not going to be productive. And so you need ambition to be productive. But if your ambition goes beyond a point and people smell that, you'll start turning people away and your productivity is going to drop dramatically. And so what you need to be a successful leader is to have the right kind of ambition. So it's a kind of unselfish kind of ambition. It may sound like a contradiction in terms, but it is a more inclusive ambition than apart from your own agenda. And I think that was the heart of what Andy Grove shared with me. And I just wanted to share that with all of you because it relates so directly to what Elena was just saying.
Mukul, thank you. You're one of the best storytellers, so I'm grateful that you shared the story. And it's fascinating because so in our conversations with boards, we often talk about this point of ambition, and we actually talk about, is this person ambitious for themselves, for their personal advancement, or for the enterprise? And that's a really important distinction for sure.
Okay, this question from Harshvardhan Vala. And I guess a lot of us can relate to this one. And if you have the answer for this one, I think you are solving it for a lot of people. How do great leaders avoid procrastination?
Oh my goodness, what a great question. I know Adam Grant actually has something on procrastination, right, Mukul? What's Adam's advice?
So Adam gives again, not to tell too many stories, but Adam's view is that he himself, had to fight to become a procrastinator. He was one of those people who, if he was given an assignment that was due in 6 months, he would finish it in 6 weeks, and then he would wonder what to do, for the rest of the time. So he and in his view, the value of procrastination is that when you procrastinate, it is not so much because you're avoiding an unpleasant task. It is because you're something of a perfectionist. And you're just not satisfied with the first draft or the second draft or the third draft in your own mind. And the most memorable story he tells about this is Martin Luther King. So when he was in Washington and he was about to give his speech, which famously became I Have a Dream speech, his colleagues were asking him to submit the text of his speech over and over again, but he endlessly kept revising and revising and revising, and you could say procrastinating finishing the speech. And even when he was on the podium, he was still working on the speech. And it was on that podium, minutes before he gave the speech, that he added the words, "I have a dream."
Wow.
And so the value of procrastination, if you want to think about it, is it allows you to keep improving and improving and improving. The time when it becomes problematic is, as Elena said in the beginning, if it stops you from being decisive.
Or reliable for
Or
others.
reliable. So you've got to manage that balance between not rushing to think that your first draft is the final draft versus not being indecisive and not being unreliable. If you can manage that balance, then you can be productively procrastinating, as Adam Grant calls it.
Yeah, there are the productive procrastinators, but I think we are also talking about those that never got to the first draft.
Well, so I do have a bit of a take on procrastination for those who never get to the first draft. My experience, I am a procrastinator. My experience as just a human and also working with CEOs, we usually procrastinate around have-tos. Like there are things, if you think about your day, there are things you want to do and there are things you have to do. And we rarely procrastinate around things we want to do. So I had a coaching session with a CEO and she said, "Yeah, I really should do that." I said, "No, stop right here. You will do nothing." Like when I hear a client saying, "Yeah, I really should do that," let's see what is it that you actually want to do. And so what I try to do with my clients and what actually helps me is I try to really, like, if I know I'm procrastinating on something, I'm trying to figure out, is there actually, like, what is it that I actually want? Like, is there I want to behind this I have to? And usually if you peel down, so for example, I'm terrible. Now it's a little bit better because I've done so many of them, but it used to be so stressful for me to prepare for public speaking. Awful, just terrible. And so I procrastinated until the last minute. I was completely stressed out. I was freaking out, but I wasn't preparing because I was frozen, right? But the I want to under it, and which was like, I have to do this thing. But the I want to was, it was so important for me to bring this knowledge and bring this research to the widest circle of people. And so what helps me get through procrastination is be really clear about, if I have these commitments on my plate, what's the I want to underneath? And then usually we can rally and motivate behind I want to, or I need to. These things are really important to me. And then you kind of, it's a little bit like, you know, anything else in life, right? You have to, you want to eat a meal, you got to go to the store and prepare the food, right? So we're willing to take some of the burden for the sake of something that's really important to us. So my way of cutting through procrastination is like trying to find something that's like, where did it start for me to begin with? And am I still committed to that goal? And I actually find that CEOs often are very clear about what is it that they want to do. And they don't tend to take on a lot of have-tos that don't have something that's really important underneath.
Okay, this, I guess, question is directed in terms of your own experience, but I know you have researched it also, and it is part of one of your themes. But can you please recount a major setback that you received in your journey as a leader, and how did you overcome it?
Oh my God, I get setbacks every day. So, but I'll tell you a funny one. Well, sort of. It's funny now. It's not funny. It wasn't funny at the time. It's never funny at the time when it happens. By the way, in our data set, so 45% of the leaders who became successful CEOs had huge setbacks. So not like a mistake, garden variety, but a big blow up, something that felt at the moment maybe getting fired, or something that was a huge blow up, you know, missing a big target, or mishandling a big acquisition. So the book, I feel very fortunate. It's a New York Times and the Wall Street Journal bestseller, right? And we did have help, obviously. We had a terrific writing team that worked with us to help us with the book. But as you could imagine, we had to do quite a bit of writing. If you looked at me in 2003, I want to say, you would have seen me. I was at McKinsey, and I was a manager at McKinsey. And the head of the McKinsey media practice sat me down and said, "Look, we've been telling you for the last 3 years that your writing is just really not good. And at this point, I just have to tell you, your writing is so bad. We're kind of starting to wonder if your thinking is good. And like, you don't want someone at McKinsey to tell you they're wondering. And then he made it very clear, just in case I wasn't hearing it still, you're like, we'd like to promote you, but we're not going to promote you unless you fix the writing. And so it's a little ironic, right? That, certainly at that point, I had no aspirations to be writing books, but I spent the next, quite very agonizing days and hours. First, I went through all the phases of, denial, rejection, bargaining, and all of that very, very quickly. And McKinsey had a great communication specialist at the time. And I just ran to her. And I think I was in tears. I'm pretty sure I was. And I think I must have said something like, I don't even agree with this, but we have to fix this. And so that at the time felt like a huge setback. In hindsight, we can all laugh at it, but at the time it really wasn't funny.
Yeah, I guess we are coming to the end of our time. So let's take this question, which I guess will tie into why we are doing this in the way that we are. And the question is, how is the COVID-19 pandemic transforming the CEO? And more especially, I guess, in terms of your own project, the CEO Genome Project, what are you seeing are the implications of, I guess, the new norm under which CEOs must operate? Yeah,
thank you, Ashal. It's a great question. And of course, the jury is still out, right? Because that book is still being written as we speak. I'll tell you one thing. So most of my CEOs can't wait to get back into the office. I think they're in a different position than a lot of their employees. I think a lot of the employees, especially women or kind of dual income families where both parents are working, are thinking, actually part of my life being telecommuting is not a bad thing. So CEOs can't wait to get back into the office so they can have their teams and they can really feel like they can kind of get their arms around the business. I think we've all gotten a crash course in adaptability. I think we've all learned that we've been forced to adapt. And I think probably all of us have done things that we didn't think were possible. I think the big silver lining there's so much pain and suffering associated with COVID, but the big silver lining is that in our own way, small or big, I think we've all done things that we never thought would be possible, right? Like to put the entire world on remote learning and telemedicine would have never been possible otherwise. I think what was interesting in the US is that COVID was a challenge that CEOs really got energized by, as hard as it was. The George Floyd and the social justice was actually really hard. It was harder for them than COVID was. It was more personal. It was harder for them to grapple with. And so what we found is CEOs have had to be more empathetic. So CEOs who've done a good job, right? It was a really interesting balance of quote unquote hard and soft skills, right? They've had to be incredibly decisive in the environment where everything was unknown, right? Where the stakes were really high, right? It's pretty rare that as a CEO of a non-healthcare company, you're making decisions that literally affect lives and deaths of your employees. And today you could be a hotel operator, you could be a retailer, and the decision to bring your employees back, to reopen, all of that will have real implications to lives and livelihoods. And the trade-offs are really, truly lives are at stake. And then at the same time, they've found that to make those decisions, they had to learn to be really empathetic and which is back to engaging for results, right? And to be empathetic, you have to start with yourself, right? They had to learn to face their own fears and their own discomfort and kind of get beyond that. So I think we'll actually, another interesting data point, I looked at it, Mukul, in the US, we had the highest number of first-time CEOs heading into COVID. And so it's fascinating. So you had a highest crop of kind of new first-time CEO leaders heading into this crisis. And I think we're actually going to have, some terrific leaders at all levels forged through this.
Okay, I guess we would be ending it, but there's one question here that I can't pass up. So I'm going to pose it to you. How do you explain the behavior of eccentric CEOs like Elon Musk?
Oh my goodness. Well, good luck if anyone can explain it. Look, I think they tend to be entrepreneurs, right? And there's a whole other book to be written, and lots of books have been written about entrepreneurs. I think with anyone, right, you would just like with your spouse, you have to kind of take the full package, right? And a lot of times individuals who are really creative, I think entrepreneurs' strength tends to come from challenging convention, assuming everything is possible, and really breaking our paradigm of what's possible. And, you know, it probably goes to other aspects of their lives too. So it's a really fun question though.
Okay, thanks, Elena. There are a few other questions, and I think I might share some of these with Mukul, and perhaps if you have some thoughts, you know, you can we can share it back with some of the ones that we
Sure.
could.
Yeah, and you can also, you guys can address, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not on Twitter as much, but I'm on LinkedIn and I'm happy to answer questions as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Elena, Mukul, and everyone who has joined us on today's leadership chat. We hope you found the conversation stimulating, and we look forward to seeing you in next month's chat.